All right, today we're going to break down a really complex theological argument from the early 20th century. The author here is trying to build this airtight logical case for why the divinity of Christ is just absolutely central to the whole Christian worldview. So we're going to trace that logic step by step and see exactly how it all fits together.
So the author kicks things off with this really powerful quote from Martineau, and it basically sets the stage for everything that follows. The core idea is this: your beliefs, they don't just exist in a vacuum. They're part of a system. And inside any system, there's this inexorable logic that's going to push any idea you start with all the way to its final, unavoidable conclusion. That concept right there is the engine that's going to drive this entire argument.
And this is the big question the source text is built around. And notice it's framed as way more than just a religious query. It's the fundamental pivot point for an entire worldview. The author's whole goal is to show how your answer to this one question sets off a domino effect for pretty much everything else you believe.
So where do we even start? Well, the author begins right where the friction is, the biggest sticking point. The initial premise is that for the so-called modern mind, the single greatest obstacle, the real stumbling block, is the doctrine of the Incarnation, the whole idea of a divine Christ. And the way the author talks about this doctrine is pretty intense. This isn't some optional extra, something you can just take or leave. The argument is that it's the absolute central pillar of Christianity. The text even points to famous skeptics, like David Strauss, who actually agreed that if you pull out the Incarnation, the whole system just collapses. Yeah, it's basically an all-or-nothing deal.
Okay, so if you start by rejecting the Incarnation, where does that inexorable logic take you? Well, this next part traces that very path of doubt downward, following all the logical consequences.
The argument here is that history kind of boils things down over time. All those nuanced middle ground views, that Christ was an angel but not quite God, they tend to just collapse. And what you're left with are two main opposing positions. Either Christ is truly divine or he's purely human. The author's point? There is no stable middle ground. You have to pick a side.
And here we go. This is the first big step down the ladder, as the author sees it. The moment you reject a truly divine Christ, you land right here, at humanitarianism. This is the view of Christ as an exceptional, inspiring, brilliant human being. Maybe the greatest religious genius who ever lived, but a human being, period. Nothing supernatural about him.
Okay, this slide pretty much lays out the whole roadmap for the downward spiral. Once you land on humanitarianism, the author argues that each position after that is logically unstable. The idea is that if you see Christ as just a man, it starts to chip away at the whole idea of a personal God you can interact with. Then that abstract belief fades into agnosticism, not knowing, which finally spirals down into outright pessimism. Let's see how they connect those dots.
All right, so here's the next domino to fall. The text argues that a living theism, a belief in a personal, interactive God, is held up by the idea of divine revelation. So if you remove Christ as the ultimate revelation, it's like the main phone line gets cut. God becomes this distant, silent, philosophical concept. And you guessed it, the author says that kind of abstract God is just a hop, skip, and a jump away from straight-up agnosticism.
And this quote? Man, it really hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures the consequence of that abstract theism, both emotionally and intellectually. You can't have a real relationship with a concept. An impersonal stream of tendency doesn't offer any comfort or help or sympathy. It's a God you can't pray to.
So, if we follow this chain of logic all the way down, we get to what the author calls the final destination, the unavoidable end of the line, the absolute bottom of the abyss.
And the argument lands on this really famous line from Macbeth. If there's no knowable God, no ultimate reason for anything, then history is just a bunch of illusions. Progress is a total myth. Life itself just becomes noise, full of sound and fury, but meaning absolutely nothing. This endpoint is what the author calls pessimism. Now, we got to be clear here. We're not just talking about being a bit sad or cynical. No, this is a formal philosophy, the kind you see in thinkers like Schopenhauer. It's a worldview that says existence itself was a mistake, a cosmic screw-up, and that our ability to be conscious of it all is actually a curse.
But just when you think we've hit rock bottom, the argument does this really cool 180. The claim is that buried deep inside this pessimistic worldview, there's a huge, fatal flaw, a contradiction that actually forces the entire chain of reasoning to start climbing back out of the abyss. Let's see how.
And this is the pivot, The whole philosophy of pessimism uses logic and reason to prove that the universe is irrational. But wait a minute, where did that logic and reason come from in the first place? How can a fundamentally irrational, meaningless universe produce a conscious mind that's capable of figuring all that out, right? It's a total paradox.
So that paradox is what starts the climb back up. The author's argument is that reason itself has to come from a rational source. An orderly universe implies an orderer. From there, it's a quick trip up. A rational source has to be an eternal self-consciousness. And a conscious, moral, rational source for everything, well, that's just another name for God. So the claim is that even this ultimate pessimism, if you follow its own logic, has to lead you right back to theism. Crazy, right?
Okay, so theism is back on the table, and the climb keeps going. If we accept a personal, rational God, is it really logical to think he would just stay silent and isolated? Think about it. Would a creator make us in his own rational, moral image and then just ghost us? The logic here suggests no. A living theism requires a God who actually reveals himself.
And that right there leads us straight to the idea of revelation. See, the God we've reasoned our way back to isn't some vague, abstract eternity. He's a being who is personal, who communicates, who enters into fellowship with people, and who actively seeks a relationship with us. This is a God who can and would intervene and speak.
And boom, the whole journey comes full circle, right back to the question we started with. If you accept that a personal, rational God exists, and that God would want to reveal himself to humanity, then, the argument concludes, Jesus Christ is that ultimate, most complete form of that divine self-revelation.
Okay, so after that wild ride down to the bottom and all the way back up, what's the big takeaway? This whole thing was designed to weld two big ideas together, to show that they are logically inseparable.
The author's ultimate thesis, then, is that these two beliefs are like two sides of the same arch. A real, living belief in God is held up by a belief in Christ as his divine revealer, and a belief in a divine Christ is built on a belief in God. According to that inexorable logic we started with, you just can't logically have one without the other. They stand or they fall together.
And the whole thing leaves us with this final, really provocative thought, all wrapped up in this one quote. It's really the perfect summary of the entire argument, that belief in a divine Christ isn't some add-on to believing in God, but that they are two sides of the same coin, completely intertwined, both logically and spiritually. It's a fascinating argument, right? It's definitely designed to make you stop and think about how your own beliefs are all connected.